Her son toasted to her legacy, but she didn't flinch. He believed he was the heir, the one she had built everything for. At brunch, under the city skyline, he played confident, charming, untouchable. She sat calm, measured, unstoppable. By nightfall, his access, his control, his claim, everything he thought was owed, would vanish. She had spent decades building the foundation. Now, she was reclaiming the house, and when he realized, it would be far too late. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Marla's 70th birthday brunch. One joke too many. The sun poured over the Mercer Hotel's rooftop lounge, washing everything in a late morning gloss of gold and privilege. Manhattan sprawled behind the glass railings like a painted backdrop, flawless and far away. Inside the private event area, the brunch table gleamed. White linen, minimalist flower arrangements, and a sculpted tower of blood orange mimosas melting slowly in the heat. At the head of the table sat Marla Baird, 70 today, posture impeccable, lipstick unbothered. Around her were friends, former colleagues, and unfortunately, her son Dylan and his wife, Tasha. Dylan stood with a practiced air, the kind of confidence that was more charm than substance. He raised his glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon, calling for silence without asking permission. To my mother, he began, pausing just long enough to make it seem like a genuine moment of affection. The woman who built an empire, mentored half of Manhattan. A few nods, someone clapped too early, and still insists on proofreading my emails like they're SEC filings. Laughter bubbled up. Light, surface level, eager to follow his lead. Dylan smiled. Here's to Marla. May her next chapter include fewer spreadsheets and more knitting needles. That got a louder laugh. Marla didn't move, not a smile, not a blink. Tasha took her cue. And fewer boardroom suggestions, she added, her voice sugar-coated but sharp, the words landing like a stiletto heel on glass. She laughed before anyone else could. Even the server hesitated mid-pour. Sammy, Marla's longtime assistant turned proxy, sat 2 seats down, fingers stiff around her coffee cup. Her dark eyes darted from Tasha to Dylan, then back to Marla, who still hadn't spoken. Instead, Marla picked up her dessert fork and cut into her fruit tart, slow, precise, as if the pastry demanded more attention than the people at her table. Well, she said, lifting a single blackberry. Some habits die harder than sons expect. A beat of silence, then laughter again, but it came too fast, too loud, a touch off. Howard, seated directly across from Sammy, looked up from his phone. She felt the buzz on her own screen seconds later, hidden beneath her cloth napkin. Howard. They just insulted the last person who could have saved them. Sammy didn't reply. She didn't have to. Brunch wound down with faked compliments, cheek kisses, and a few forced group photos against the skyline. Tasha posed like she was on a magazine shoot. Dylan kept his arm around Marla's shoulder a moment too long for a man who just mocked her in public. You'll love the spa voucher, Tasha told her, handing over an envelope. It's a full weekend in the Catskills. Detox, digital free. Lovely, Marla murmured, taking it with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. As the last guest left and the quartet packed up, Sammy caught up with her near the elevator. Need me to stay and help pack up? No, Marla said, without looking up from her phone. Go home. Rest. You'll need it. For what? Marla pressed the call button. Tomorrow. Back at her Upper East Side condo, Marla didn't bother turning on the lights. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows was still intact. An unbroken line of cityscape she had earned with blood, strategy, and more late nights than anyone at that brunch would ever understand. She pulled off her heels, walked barefoot to her study, and opened the laptop on her glass desk. No hesitation, just intention. A folder on her desktop blinked back at her. D&T Holdings, internal inside. She opened a document labeled Reverse Acquisition Draft, Confidential. The legal language was dense, but she knew every word of it. She'd written most of it herself 3 months ago, back when she still believed Dylan could be trusted. She clicked it closed and opened messages. To Howard. Message. 7 a.m. Secure line. Tell no one. She stared at the screen a moment longer, then typed, Message 2. They think they're funny. Sent. Across the city, Dylan and Tasha lounged in a leather booth at the Gramercy Club, nursing bourbon and self-satisfaction. She actually thanked us for the spa voucher, Tasha said, laughing. Can you imagine? Like we didn't just stage her retirement party with mimosas. Dylan smirked. Honestly, that went better than I thought. He pulled out his phone to check for messages. Nothing urgent. Until suddenly a text from an unknown number popped up. Tick. He frowned. Another followed. Talk. His eyes narrowed. Did you just… Tasha looked up. What? He turned the phone toward her, but the screen had already gone dark. Somewhere in the shadows of their false celebration, the first domino had fallen. They built their kingdom on borrowed nails. Now she's holding the hammer. The early morning skyline was still blue-black when Marla stepped into her private office on the 43rd floor of the Gable Securities Building, long before staff arrived. Long before the elevators chirped with junior analysts. The space was hers still, a relic of the firm she had founded and stepped back from, not surrendered. She keyed in her password, 7 characters, no numbers, just one word. Blueprint. Her screens lit up. Howard joined by secure video a minute later, still in his own office, tie askew, coffee cup steaming like a signal flare. You're early, he said. I've been up since 3. Rage ages differently after 65. He gave a half smile. I reviewed the old investor files, the convertible note. It's airtight. Dylan signed it personally in 2017. The clause is still in play. Marla leaned forward. Default? He nodded. They never paid you back. No interest payments, no conversion. It matured 18 months ago. Technically, you could invoke the default clause today and convert to controlling equity. Marla didn't blink. Howard added, Victor's double-checking it now. She opened a drawer in her desk, removed a bound document wrapped in faded blue ribbon. The original note. Dylan had brought it to her in a manila envelope with handshaken confidence and too much cologne. His big dream, his legacy. She'd believed him, she'd signed. Then she'd watched. An hour later, Victor Mendez arrived in person, mid-30s, sharp, still wearing last night's dinner jacket under a wool coat. Legal mind like a guillotine. He flipped through the contract without looking up. They have no clue, do they? Tasha thinks it was a gift, Marla said dryly. Victor chuckled. It wasn't. He tapped the page. Clause 14C, triggered on non-payment. You can convert the $175K into a 27% ownership stake. It includes full voting rights because of the embedded rights protection rider. Standard in those days, but no one reads that far down. Marla raised an eyebrow. So I walk in and vote them out? No. He set the pages down carefully. You build your stake over the next quarter. Do it quiet, controlled. They won't even notice until they're out of oxygen. Marla folded her arms. And Dylan? Victor hesitated. He'll fight it. That's not a concern. His foundation's built on my money. Time to take back the bricks. Tasha, meanwhile, was across the city at a branding shoot for a new D&T product line, some overpriced wellness app rebranded as Executive Resilience. She twirled a crystal tumbler for the camera, all sharp cheekbones and curated calm. I can't believe Marla actually liked the spa voucher, she said between shots. I mean, who turns 70 and still shows up in heels at 10 a.m.? She's built different, the photographer muttered. She's done, Tasha corrected, laughing. Thank God Dylan had the sense to build the company on our terms, not hers. Can you imagine her on the board? No one responded, but someone in the corner raised an eyebrow. Tasha didn't notice. Back in the office, Howard stepped away from the call and rejoined Marla with a fresh printout in hand. Updated cap table, he said. If you convert today and start acquiring the unallocated shares through shell accounts, you can position yourself to trigger a reorg vote by Q2. You'd be one board seat away from majority control. Marla took the pages, scanned them, saw Dylan's name, Tasha's, hers. Then the footnote. Initial seed investment. Baird Capital, $175,000. Convertible note, active. She smiled faintly. Howard watched her. You okay? She looked out the window. They spent 7 years pretending they built a fortress, but the foundation was mine. They borrowed the wood. He raised an eyebrow. And now, she said, I own the nails. Howard exhaled. Poetic. No, Marla said, eyes still on the skyline. Accurate. That night, Dylan opened a bottle of scotch. He sat at his kitchen island while Tasha went on about branding wins and newsletter growth. He smiled, nodded, pretended to listen. Until he checked his inbox. Subject. Notice of intent to convert equity. Baird Capital. Sender. V. Mendezi. He froze. Below, the attached legal document. Dylan? Tasha asked. He didn't answer. She crossed the room, heels echoing. What is it? He turned the laptop toward her. She read it once, then again. Her face went pale. Wait. I thought she gave you that money. You said it wasn't a loan. It was convertible, Dylan whispered. I never thought she couldn't. Tasha stared at him, fury crawling up her throat. You idiot. Marla sat alone on her balcony, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. She sipped from a glass of cold white wine, not for comfort, but for ritual. The city blinked back at her. Sammy's message lit up her screen. Sammy, they're scrambling. Legal flagged it. Marla smiled, calm, calculated. She typed one sentence. Marla, time to finish the frame. Numbers don't lie, but liars love numbers. Marla sat in her study just past 6 a.m. The sky outside her penthouse still a deep pre-dawn charcoal. She'd been up for hours, waiting, not for clarity, but confirmation. It came when the secure folder pinged open on her desktop. Account ledgers D&T 22Q4 or XLSRCAT source. Sammy, the spreadsheet cracked open like a confession. Row after row of transactions, messy, unclassified, reckless. A $4,600 charge from a boutique in Soho labeled Consulting Accessories. A luxury resort stay listed under Wellness Retreat Research. 5 different Uber accounts, all tied to one corporate card. Marla adjusted her glasses, scrolling slowly. Sloppy. Below the fold, 8 separate contractors, each billing monthly retainers, none with EINs or legal names. She clicked through the tabs. No audit trail, no compliance logs, no signatures, just chaos parading as commerce. A message pinged. Sammy, pulled from Tasha's cloud. Unsecured folder, no MFA, just ego. Marla smiled. She pressed print all. The printer in the next room stirred to life, dozens of sheets of quiet leverage piling onto the tray. She walked over barefoot, collected the warm stack, and clipped them into 4 red-labeled binders. She didn't rush. She filed them in the cabinet alphabetically. When she closed the drawer, it clicked like a loaded chamber. Victor arrived 2 hours later, jacket half-buttoned, energy sharp as glass. Got your text, he said, dropping a briefcase on her desk. Tell me what I'm looking at. Marla handed him one of the binders. He flipped through 3 pages before looking up. Misappropriation, unreported benefits, and willful failure to separate personal and business accounts. If this goes public, it won't just end their careers. It could drag D&T into regulatory hell. Build the file, Marla said, calm. Keep it private for now. You sure? This is SEC-grade malpractice. I'm not interested in fire. She looked him dead in the eyes. I prefer rot. Quiet, patient, irreversible. Victor exhaled, impressed. Understood. Later, Howard joined her in the firm's war room, where the lights stayed low and the soundproofing kept secrets better than people ever could. She laid the binders out on the glass conference table. Howard flipped through them slowly, hands folded under his chin. You know, he said finally, I always assumed they'd make mistakes, but this is arrogant. Marla poured them both coffee. They thought I stopped watching. Howard looked up. Want to go public? Not yet. She stirred her coffee once, precisely. I want them to feel it in whispers first, in sideways glances, the tension in investor calls, the silence in rooms they used to own. Howard leaned back. You're terrifying. I'm organized, Marla replied. Meanwhile, across town, Dylan's office door was closed for once. Tasha stood at the window, arms crossed, mouth tight. You knew this wasn't buttoned up, she said. I didn't know she still had the original contract, Dylan snapped. flipping through paperwork with sweat-slick fingers. I didn't know she kept a damn copy of everything. Tasha turned to him. You said this was clean. I thought it was. You thought wrong. Her phone buzzed. A message from their CFO. Need clarification on 4Q4 entries flagged by outside counsel. Are we prepared for investor audit next week? She didn't answer. That afternoon, Marla made one phone call. No assistant, no intermediaries. She dialed a number from memory and waited. Kara Liu, a clipped voice, answered. She never wasted time. Kara. Marla bared. A pause. Then, didn't expect this call. Not after your exit. I didn't exit, I shifted lanes. Kara smiled into the receiver. Let me guess. D&T? Can we meet? When? Tomorrow, discreet. Location? I'll send coordinates. No names, no entourage. A beat. Sounds like blood's in the water. Not yet, Marla said. But it will be. She hung up without goodbye. That night, Victor sent a message from his secure channel. Victor. Full breach file drafted. Could trigger internal investigation if shared. Want me to hold or distribute? Marla. Hold. One leak changes the air pressure. She closed her laptop. Picked up one of the red binders. Ran her fingers down its spine like it was a diary she hadn't written, just read. Outside, the city buzzed under a velvet sky. Inside, the ledger waited to ruin them. Power doesn't shift in shouting matches. It slips across signed paper. The corner office at 425 Lexington wasn't listed on any company directory. It belonged to no one and everyone. Leased under a shell LLC, furnished with just enough precision to feel neutral. Gray marble floors. A single abstract painting. A wide glass desk with nothing personal on it. It was the kind of place where serious people came to speak softly about dangerous things. At 9:02 a.m., Marla stepped inside, wearing a charcoal wrap coat and soft leather gloves, the same color as her restraint. She nodded to the assistant by the elevator, who wordlessly let her in. Kara Liu was already waiting, seated. Legs crossed, black slacks, navy blazer, understated, surgical, every move trimmed of excess. She didn't stand. She didn't need to. Marla unbuttoned her coat, draped it over the back of the opposite chair, and sat down. You look rested, Kara said, not quite a compliment. Marla folded her hands on the table. And you look like you never stopped. Kara allowed the faintest grin. So, why now? Marla slid a manila folder across the table. Because now they're vulnerable, and I still own 27% of D&T's voting rights. They forgot I was on the cap table, and I let them. Kara flipped open the folder. Legal exhibits, equity structure diagrams, a short executive summary marked confidential, not for distribution. I had Victor draft it this morning, Marla said. The convertible clause matured. We triggered it. My shares are now live, real, activated, and pointed directly at their blind spot. Kara skimmed the documents. You've been sitting on this? Patience, Marla said. They call it weakness until it's a weapon. Kara looked up. And what exactly do you want? Leverage, Marla said. I take board control quietly. No press, no scandal, just pressure. Strategic, internal, surgical. Once I'm in position, you move in. Acquire D&T undermarket before they know they're bleeding. Kara's brow lifted slightly. You think I want that mess of a brand? I think you want their data IP, their client pipeline, and their infrastructure in Singapore. And I think you don't want them in the hands of Archer Kaplan. Kara blinked, but said nothing. Marla leaned forward. They've got 6 months left before investors start asking questions they can't answer. I'm offering you clean entry, exclusive terms. Victor's preparing the LOI. Kara studied her, fingers tented in thought. You're not just taking the company, you're erasing them. Marla said nothing. A long silence followed, padded only by the quiet hum of the HVAC and the occasional whisper of traffic 6 stories below. Finally, Kara closed the folder and nodded once. Due diligence starts today. If the books are as broken as you say, I'll move. Fast. They are, Marla said simply. And Dylan, Tasha? They'll see the lights go out one bulb at a time. Kara stood smoothing her blazer. I want Victor to loop in my legal team this afternoon. He's ready. One more question, Kara said, pausing at the edge of the table. Why me? Marla rose slowly. Because you don't flinch, and you don't talk. The two women held each other's gaze for a moment, two sharks circling the same scent. Not rivals, just mirror images. Then Marla turned to leave. She paused at the doorway, pulling on her gloves with the same care she once used signing 7-figure checks. Kara? Yes? Don't mistake silence for mercy. And she was gone. Later that afternoon, Victor's office at Mendez Roth Legal buzzed like a shortwave radio. He stood at the whiteboard, drawing arrows between LLCs, offshore subsidiaries, and shell trusts. Sammy sat nearby, taking notes. You think they'll contest? Victor didn't look up. They can't. Their own bylaws protect Marla's stake. Once she calls a vote, it's locked. He opened a shared document, clicked send. Subject: Letter of Intent, D&T Holdings Acquisition Recipients. Kara Liu, Marla Baird, Legal Counsel. A minute later, his phone buzzed. Kara Liu, received. In review. He exhaled, sat back. She's actually doing it, Sammy said. Victor smiled. No, she already did. Across the city, Dylan stood alone in the boardroom of D&T, staring at the firm's quarterly burn rate projections, lips pressed tight. Tasha entered behind him, holding 2 coffees, both untouched. He didn't turn when she spoke. I had a weird call from a friend at Solace Capital. Said Kara Liu just triggered a diligence review. For us. Dylan's shoulders stiffened. They think we're about to get acquired, she said. By a ghost. He finally turned. She's coming for everything, Tasha nodded, voice low. And we just left the front door open. Sometimes silence is sharper than any blade. Marla Baird set her dining table for 3. No caterers, no assistants. Just linen napkins, good china, and the steady hum of Ella Fitzgerald floating from the vintage record player in the corner. She hadn't hosted a family dinner in nearly 2 years. Not since the merger announcement that had turned her son into a stranger. But tonight, the table gleamed like reconciliation. The air smelled of brown sugar and baked peaches. It was a performance, and every prop mattered. At 7:04, the elevator chimed. Dylan entered first, jacket too crisp, smile too careful. Behind him, Tasha glided in, wearing white silk that screamed both confidence and calculation. Mom, you look incredible, Dylan said, leaning in for a cheek kiss. He smelled of aftershave and anxiety. I had time to rest, Marla said evenly. You two look hopeful. Tasha's laugh rang just a note too high. Hopeful's a good word. Things are looking up. We're in the final stretch before Series B, Marla motioned to the table. Then we should celebrate something, shouldn't we? They sat. Dylan filled the silence with updates. New clients, strong projections, brand partnerships in negotiation. He spoke in metrics and metaphors, the language of someone trying to sound like he still owned the future. Then, as the wine bottle emptied and their confidence loosened, Tasha leaned in. We're this close, she said, pinching her fingers together. All we need is a small bridge round to lock in Series B. Cash flow's tight and timing's everything. You know how investors get. Marla dabbed her lips with her napkin. Of course. Dylan cleared his throat. We could use your blessing, maybe a soft loan, just to stabilize until the raise closes. He smiled that old boyish smile she'd once found disarming. It didn't work anymore. Marla looked at him for a long moment. The only sound in the room was the clink of crystal against porcelain as she set her glass down. Then she smiled, slow, gentle. A perfect imitation of maternal grace. I'll think about it. Tasha exhaled in visible relief, mistaking stillness for surrender. Thank you, she said. It means a lot. Really. Marla stood and crossed to the counter, where a warm dish waited under a linen cover. She lifted it carefully, the sweet scent of peaches and butter filling the air. I made dessert, she said, carrying it to the table. Peach cobbler, my original recipe. Dylan blinked. You actually baked? 70 deserves one good revival. She placed a generous serving in front of each of them. It's funny, recipes never change, even when people do. They laughed lightly, though none of them knew why. As they ate, Tasha talked numbers again, layering charm with desperation. Dylan nodded beside her, eager, eyes darting between Marla's expression and his plate. Marla ate slowly, savoring each bite. Each word they threw across the table like currency they didn't realize was already counterfeit. When the dishes were empty and the plates cleared, she poured them coffee, dark and quiet. "Mom," Dylan began carefully, "I know things got tense, but this company, it's different now. We're responsible, transparent. Marla interrupted softly without looking up. "Responsible?" he faltered. "We've learned from mistakes." Her smile returned. "I hope so." The record clicked softly as the needle reached the end. Silence filled the space, deep and deliberate. Tasha reached across the table, resting her manicured hand over Marla's. "We really appreciate your faith in us." Marla met her eyes, calm, measured. "Faith is earned, Tasha, and so is forgiveness." A moment of quiet. Then she stood, collecting the empty dessert plates. From the doorway she called out lightly, "Sammy, could you help with the dishes?" Sammy appeared from the kitchen, dressed in simple black, hair tied back. The silent sentinel who had been there the entire evening, unnoticed until now. Tasha blinked. "I didn't realize." "She's family," Marla said, cutting her off gently. Sammy began stacking plates. As she passed Marla, she murmured low enough that only she could hear, "They have no idea, do they?" Marla's gaze never left her son and daughter-in-law. She smiled. A serene, unshakable smile that felt almost kind. "They brought a fork," she whispered, "to a chess game." Later that night, after the elevator doors sealed shut behind Dylan and Tasha, Marla stood at the window with the city glittering below. The coffee cup sat untouched. The smell of peaches lingered like nostalgia laced with arsenic. Her phone buzzed. A message from Victor. "Victor, Kara signed off on the LOI. They'll start pre-acquisition filing by Monday." Marla's reply came instantly. "Marla, perfect. I'll have dessert with them again before it closes." She set her phone down, eyes catching her reflection in the glass. Calm, steady, unforgiving. For the first time in years, she almost felt full. The game was always about control. Now they'll learn who owns the pieces. Dylan's office was dark, only the blue glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face. His hands were shaking slightly as he typed out another email, the words coming out too fast. He deleted them, then tried again. The deal had collapsed. Or at least it felt like it had. He couldn't breathe. Every thought twisted in his mind, chasing itself. He called Victor for the third time that night, but his lawyer didn't answer. The phone rang again. Nothing. He punched the desk with a fist that made the surface shake, knocking over a mug. When his phone buzzed, it was a message from Sammy. He frowned. Why was Sammy reaching out now? "Sammy, just so you know, Victor's been busy. He's tied to Marla on this." "You're talking to her, not him." Dylan froze. His mind scrambled. He ran his fingers over his face. "She's been in control the whole time?" He slumped into the chair, his chest tightening. He tried to think, tried to move, but everything felt too far gone. His phone buzzed again. "Victor, Marla activated her voting rights. She's officially in play." Meanwhile, across town in the glass tower of D&T's headquarters, Tasha paced frantically across the conference room floor. Her phone was glued to her ear, but it was obvious the person on the other end wasn't calming her down. "Get them on the line now. We need a crisis meeting. I don't care what time it is." She waved her hand in frustration. "They can't back out. The investors can't know what's happening, not yet." Her voice was rising, sharp with panic. The polished veneer she'd perfected for years was cracking, every word thick with an edge of desperation. She ended the call and turned to the window, staring out at the skyline. The city looked so still from up here, but she knew it wasn't. "Everything's moving faster than we thought. I can feel it closing in." She didn't notice the figure in the corner at first. Sammy stood there, quietly observing, taking notes with an air of detachment that unnerved Tasha. Tasha didn't acknowledge her, but Sammy had never needed acknowledgement. She wasn't there for small talk. She was just there to watch. A moment later, the door opened. Dylan stepped in, his expression pale and tight. "We need to get ahead of this," Tasha said immediately, her voice laced with anxiety. "Call the board. Get them on the call by tomorrow morning. We'll stop the bleeding before anyone realizes what's happening." Dylan looked at her, his eyes wild. "We don't even know what's happening anymore, Tasha." He ran a hand through his hair, still reeling from the realization that the one thing he thought was under control, the one thing that had always been his, was slipping away. Marla, his mother, she was in the game now. The fear in his chest was growing by the second. In the quiet of Marla's home office, she sat in front of her screen, the soft glow of her monitor casting long shadows on the walls. The final step had been taken. The final vote was now hers. She hadn't rushed. She didn't need to. Dylan and Tasha were playing a game they didn't understand, not yet. They thought this was about loans and cash flow. But it was never about that. It had always been about control. Her fingers hovered over the submit button as the board meeting access request was finalized, the first formal step in securing her seat. In 2 days, the board would feel her presence, and they wouldn't even know what hit them. A ping from Howard cut through her thoughts. Howard, done. She's cornered. The power is with you, but we're not at checkmate yet. She nodded, reading the message with calm understanding. No, we're not there yet, Howard. But we will be soon. At the same moment, Kara sat in her office, a glass of scotch in hand. Her expression was sharp, but her eyes softened as she read through her latest report from Victor. She tapped the screen once, then twice. Ready to buy them out when you say so, she murmured to herself. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Marla. Marla, it's time. Make the call. Kara stood, setting the scotch down with deliberate slowness. She was no longer the observer, no longer waiting for the right moment. Now, she was the hammer. In the next hour, her legal team would file the paperwork for the acquisition. It would be quiet under the radar, no press release, no fanfare. Just one more transaction buried beneath others that would disappear before they ever reached the surface. But what would remain was control, absolute control. Back in the war room, the tension was palpable as Tasha, Dylan, and the rest of the board sat around the conference table. Investors had been called. The calls had been frantic, fast. They had to act quickly, but there was something wrong, something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Tasha shot a glance at Dylan, who was pacing now, his thoughts racing. He stopped suddenly, eyes wide. He had just seen the email, the one that changed everything. Marla has voting control, he muttered, voice hoarse. She's already in. It's too late. At the edge of the conference table, Sammy sat still, eyes flicking between them. Her expression unreadable. She knew, of course. She always had. She was just waiting for them to realize it. And when they did, when everything finally unraveled, she would be there to watch. Every lie is a spark. Marla just knew how to make them incendiary. Marla sat in the dim light of her home office, fingers tapping the keys with precise, almost mechanical calm. She had crafted the message slowly, choosing each word, each detail, and then, without hesitation, she hit send. The memo had been carefully prepared, a subtle yet damning document that outlined a series of financial misstatements from the D&T quarterly reports. She forwarded it to Victor and Kara, her partners in this quiet war. Marla, let's light the fuse. Victor's reply came almost immediately. Victor, on it. I'll notify the board and trigger the audit. They won't know what hit them. Marla nodded, eyes narrowing as she leaned back in her chair. Checkmate's a process, not a moment. Within the hour, the first ripple hit the boardroom at D&T. The message from Victor reached its recipients. Board of Directors, third-party audit initiated, and the atmosphere shifted. Tasha, sitting at the head of the conference table, had just started another round of frantic calls when her phone buzzed. Her eyes went cold as she read the email. A third-party audit. No, she whispered under her breath, leaning forward as she scrolled through the attachment. This isn't possible. How? Her voice trailed off as she recognized the signature on the email. Victor Mendez. Her phone buzzed again. It was from Dylan. Dylan. How the hell did we get here? This can't be real, her breath hitched. They had known about the issues in the books. Hell, they'd even brushed off a few discrepancies, calling them accounting quirks, things that could be fixed later. But this was a different level. Tasha stood abruptly, knocking her chair back with a scrape. It's Marla, she hissed. She pulled this, she made this happen. It's her move. Wait, one of the board members said, looking at his phone. We have email threads from her involvement all the way back to Q2. Tasha froze. What? The board member held up his phone, showing the email headers. "We're listed in these. Her name's been on every email chain regarding these issues." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "You didn't know." Tasha's throat tightened. Her pulse quickened. She reached for her phone and tried to call Dylan, but it went straight to voicemail. The weight of everything that was happening sank in, deeper and faster than she could process. "I didn't know she had this much control," she said, voice tight with panic. "I thought we were covering this up." Across the city, Dylan stared at his screen, trying desperately to focus on the numbers before him. His mind raced as he read through the audit notification. Panic clawed at his chest. This was the last thing he wanted. He picked up the phone. "Victor," he said, his voice shaky. "What the hell is this? Why are you starting an audit?" There was a long pause. "Dylan, you should have known this was coming. You're on the list too. Everyone involved in the discrepancies is liable." "What discrepancies?" Dylan barked. "You're saying this is my fault?" Victor's voice came through, tight. "I'm saying that you were in charge of your own books. If I were you, I'd be worrying about the SEC soon." The words hit Dylan like a cold wave. "SEC?" His grip on the phone tightened. No, I didn't. This wasn't me. It was the intern, the analytics intern. It's her fault. She's the one who messed it up." Victor's voice went quiet. "It's not her fault, Dylan. It's all of yours." Back at the war room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Tasha paced in agitated circles as the other board members debated the next move. But her thoughts kept racing back to that message from Victor, the one that had pushed everything over the edge. It wasn't just an audit anymore, it was an investigation. They were already under the microscope, and there was no way to stop it now. She turned to Sammy, who was sitting silently in the corner, eyes flicking from one board member to the next. "You're not surprised," Tasha said. "You knew." Sammy's gaze didn't waver. "I knew you'd slip up." Tasha's jaw clenched. "You've been watching us fail all along, haven't you?" Sammy didn't flinch. "I've been tracking it all, Tasha. Every thread, every move." "And now?" Tasha asked, voice rising. "Now what?" "Now we wait," Sammy said quietly, her expression unreadable, "for the truth to catch up with you." Meanwhile, at the SEC, the first red flags had been raised. The discrepancies in the quarterly filings were too large to ignore, and the timing of the third-party audit only confirmed suspicions of foul play. The legal team there began pulling reports, reaching out to D&T's investors, demanding answers. Marla had known this would happen. She had planned for it. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and her name, though never spoken, was starting to rise to the top of every investigation. She would be the one to walk away with control, leaving nothing but ashes behind her. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed again. "Kara, let me know when you're ready to pull the trigger." Marla smiled to herself, the weight of victory still settling over her like a blanket. Not yet, Kara, she thought. Soon enough. The final game was about to begin. Some women sew buttons. Marla stitched her name into the seams of an empire. The room was quiet except for the sound of documents being slid across a mahogany table. Victor, in a dark charcoal suit, clicked the silver cap back onto his pen. Final draft. Clean. Legally irreversible after signature. Marla glanced over the top sheet, then the next. A few red lines had been resolved. The structure held. Full buyout. Asset retention for Kara's firm. Immediate removal of current executive leadership. Dylan and Tasha would be stripped of authority before their morning espresso. She didn't smile. Not yet. Across from her, Kara read silently. Her lawyer sat to her right, hands clasped tightly on the table, like he couldn't believe what was happening. She slid the pen forward. "We file by noon," she said. "Your vote secures the majority. My firm finalizes the transition. They'll be gone by close of business." Marla nodded once. "Let the board review it. They'll squirm, but facts don't need persuasion." At D&T's corporate headquarters, the board gathered in emergency session. The temperature of the room shifted as Victor walked in carrying the acquisition binder. "This isn't a discussion," he said, laying the documents out one by one. "You've all had access to the internal audit. The SEC probe is active. Your investors are already on edge." Tasha looked physically ill. Dylan said nothing. This offer protects the company, Victor continued. Staff are retained, assets preserved, reputation salvaged, leadership, his eyes flicked to Dylan, then to Tasha, is restructured. You mean gutted, Tasha hissed. Victor didn't flinch. I mean replaced. Whispers swept around the table. Half the board turned toward Marla, seated at the far end, composed in a navy silk blouse with a single gold pin at her collar. She hadn't spoken yet. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Mrs. Baird, you haven't voiced your position. Marla's voice was level. You already know it. A beat of silence, then hands raised, votes cast. And just like that, the scales tipped. Sammy stood in the back, clipboard in hand, watching it all unfold. A slow burn of awe settled into her chest. Downstairs, in the press department, the Caraloo acquisition notice hit the wire. It was clean, clinical, corporate. Strategic realignment, key leadership transition, acquisition terms, confidential, no fire, just facts. By the time the alert hit Dylan's phone, he and Tasha were already in a rideshare. He opened the app instinctively, then froze. The headline sat at the top of his screen like a bullet. Baird-backed acquisition of D&T finalized. Lou Capital confirms majority buyout. He read it twice, then again. Tasha leaned in. Where's the call? She asked, voice cracking. Where's the warning? But there was none. Marla hadn't told them. She hadn't needed to. Later that evening, as the dust began to settle, Sammy stood in Marla's home office, holding a sleek white folder with her name embossed in silver. Inside, an offer of a paid internship with board observation privileges. 2% equity stake upon completion. You're serious? Sammy asked, staring at it. Marla nodded. If you want it. I thought I'd be clearing your schedule and running logistics, not— You've been doing more than that for 3 years, Marla interrupted. You've tracked corporate fraud with more precision than most analysts I've hired. You know how to listen when no one else does. You see the seams. Sammy swallowed. Do I sign? Marla's gaze softened, just a fraction. Only if you're ready to lead better than they did. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Sammy picked up the pen. Across town, Dylan sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the hollow trappings of success. Unused golf clubs, unopened leather-bound notebooks, shelves of unread business books. He scrolled through news alerts with bloodshot eyes. One headline caught his attention. D&T leadership realigns following strategic acquisition. Sources confirm Marla Baird's role. He didn't throw the phone. He didn't scream. He just sank into the silence, realizing he was no longer the heir to anything, just a footnote in the story of his own undoing. Marla, meanwhile, returned to her quiet needlework, a physical habit she hadn't picked up in years, now strangely soothing. She sewed buttons back onto a navy coat she hadn't worn in a decade, not because she needed to, but because she could. With every thread, she thought of what had been taken, and what she had taken back. Kara's message buzzed on her screen. Kara, it's done. Nicely stitched. Marla smiled, almost imperceptibly. Marla, everything worth keeping is. Sometimes silence speaks louder than the loudest declarations. The interview request came at noon. It was standard, if a little too eager. A journalist from TechWire had been digging through public records, and now they wanted a quote, a statement from the woman who had orchestrated the acquisition. Marla stared at the email for a long moment, the cursor blinking on the screen. You can say nothing, or you can say it all. She deleted the email without responding. Some people had to speak to be heard. Others just needed to wait for the truth to find them. Across town, the city's pulse quickened. The headlines splashed across every digital outlet. D&T acquisition finalized. Baird Capital leads. Majority buyout Liu. Capital to lead strategic realignment of D&T Marla Baird. Quiet architect behind Griffin Tech success. Her name had reappeared on the original investor list, a name once buried under the weight of more public figures, more impressive brands. Now her calculated absence made her return even more meaningful. She hadn't sought the spotlight. She didn't need to. The documents spoke for her. A line appeared in TechWire's piece, quoting an anonymous source. Baird's influence was understated. She preferred to work in the shadows. But now, With this buyout, it's clear. She's the one who built the foundation. The words rang in her mind, confirming what she already knew. She had constructed this empire, brick by brick, and no amount of public renouncement could undo that. Meanwhile, Tasha sat in her apartment, watching the screen as the notifications for her social media accounts piled up. Mentions, messages, all centered around the same question. What happened to D&T's leadership? Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly as she scrolled through the countless articles detailing the aftermath of the acquisition. Every piece of news hit like a fresh wound. Where's Tasha? Where's Dylan? What's next for D&T? Tasha gritted her teeth and clicked through her social media accounts, deleting every post, every trace of her presence. She could feel the walls closing in as the narrative spun around her. This wasn't a part of the plan. She wasn't supposed to be erased. The room was silent except for the rhythmic sound of her fingers on the keyboard, erasing every trace of her once carefully constructed image. Dylan, on the other hand, sat in his office staring at his phone, another resignation letter in front of him, another round of calls he had no interest in answering. His name had already been tied to failure in the press. Another headline appeared on his phone screen. D&T founder steps down amid buyout, citing personal reasons. He ran his hand through his hair, already numb to the words. Another email from the board. The same request to explain, to salvage what little dignity remained in the wreckage. Dylan ignored it. He pressed send on the resignation letter, making it sound professional, as sterile as possible. To pursue other interests, a phrase that had become a death sentence to his career. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Tasha. Tasha. They think we're invisible. They think we don't exist. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. Dylan didn't reply. Instead, he stared at the empty desk, the space where his future used to sit. Now vacant. What had he done to get here? He remembered the sharpness of his ambition, the hunger to climb higher, but now it all felt empty, a sick, hollow feeling in his chest. He'd been in charge, or so he thought. Now, the lie he'd been living, the lie they had all been living, had come undone. Marla sat in the quiet of her study, her fingers once again working the needle through fabric, slow, deliberate. She had known they would collapse under their own weight. Pride makes people forget who's watching the books. She had watched them all. The phone buzzed. This time, it was from Kara. Kara, all filings are complete. We've put the pressure on the right people. You'll get what's owed to you. A few more calls, and it's officially yours. Marla's lips curved into a faint smile. Not yet. Not all of it. Her gaze turned to the window, the city lights shimmering below. She had started this with nothing but an idea, a few pieces of paper, and the will to do what others wouldn't. She had waited. She had watched. And now everything was in place. Later that evening, Sammy entered the study, a fresh coffee in hand. Her eyes met Marla's without a hint of hesitation. The years of watching, listening had shaped her. Ready? Sammy asked, her tone calm, but with an edge of anticipation. Marla set down her needlework, her gaze sharp. Always. The door behind them closed with a soft click. Sammy looked at the papers stacked on the desk, the final phase of the takeover. She had a piece in this puzzle now. It was no longer just Marla's game. It was theirs. You've been watching me, haven't you? Marla asked softly. Sammy didn't flinch. You didn't need to ask. I just needed to understand the pattern. Do you know how to play it? Marla's voice was steady, calm. Sammy looked at her, no hesitation in her eyes. Better than they did. Marla nodded. Then let's make it official. At that very moment, Dylan stood in front of a mirror, eyes hollow, face drawn. He looked at the man who had believed so fully in his own power. That man was gone now. He closed his eyes and exhaled, feeling something shift, something irreversible, like a door closing on everything he once thought he knew. He turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. They wanted silence. They didn't know it would be their undoing. Sammy's first board call was scheduled at 9 a.m. She had been briefed by Kara the night before, everything down to the details of the last quarterly report. She wore a tailored gray suit, hair pulled back, and a quiet determination that only people who had learned to listen could understand. The world around her had been shaken. but the pieces had fallen into place with unexpected precision. As the digital conference call began, she adjusted her headset and sat back, composing herself. The boardroom was filled with hesitant voices, board members still reeling from the takeover, but they couldn't hide their anticipation. Sammy was the youngest person on the call. The silence at the start spoke louder than anything. "Good morning," she began, her voice even, controlled. She wasn't there to make waves. She was there to lead. One by one, the board members introduced themselves, murmuring polite greetings, but Sammy wasn't distracted. She'd spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, the moment where everything she had learned, everything she had observed, would need to come together. Victor spoke first, easing into the conversation. "Sammy, I think you've had a chance to review the upcoming strategy. Let's start with your thoughts." Her fingers lightly rested on the keyboard as she toggled through her notes. There was no hesitation. She had studied the company's financials and internal audit reports in a way that even the board members hadn't expected. She had an answer for everything, and her clarity was more unsettling than any bluff could have been. "We'll stabilize the restructuring costs in Q4. I suggest we approach the liquidity with a more aggressive schedule to match growth projections," she said, voice steady. "Let's also table the stock issuance until the new management is fully in place. A premature move would only trigger unnecessary volatility. We need trust, not speculation." Kara's voice broke in with praise. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. You've got your grandmother's spine, Sammy. Very impressive." Sammy felt her pulse steady. She hadn't expected compliments, but she also hadn't needed them. Not anymore. From home, Marla sat on the couch in her study, hands moving with methodical precision as she knitted. The rhythmic clink of the needles was the only sound in the room. Her eyes trained on the small piece of fabric she was weaving together. She didn't need to be on the call. She didn't need to say a word. Her plan had been simple, and Sammy was executing it perfectly. The younger woman had always been sharp, and now, in her silence, she was carving out a seat for herself in the exact space Marla had once filled. This wasn't about revenge. It was about course correction. Marla had never been interested in theater. She didn't need applause. All she needed was control. She reached for her phone as a text from Georgia popped up. "Georgia, so that's what revenge looks like?" Marla smiled faintly, running the yarn through her fingers. "Marla, that's what correction looks like." The reply was swift. "Georgia, I see that now. You're building something better, not just knocking it down." Marla's gaze didn't waver. The world might have seen a hostile takeover, but that was never the game. Control had always been the game. And in the quiet, in the subtle movements, she was winning. Meanwhile, the boardroom call ended, and Sammy leaned back in her chair, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It had gone smoothly, almost too smoothly. Victor hung back as the others trickled out of the virtual meeting, exchanging quick pleasantries. "You did well," he said, locking eyes with Sammy. "Better than I expected." "Thank you." Sammy didn't smile, though she felt a sense of satisfaction ripple through her. She had played her part, but there was more to do. She turned off her computer and made her way to Marla's study. "Done," Sammy said, her voice low but confident. Marla looked up from her knitting, her fingers pausing mid-motion. "You did exactly what needed to be done." Sammy nodded, but there was an edge of something else in her eyes. It wasn't just about keeping things steady, it was about ownership. Marla met her gaze. "And now it's yours." Sammy sat down across from her, finally relaxing. "Thank you for not yelling at me." Marla's lips curled into a faint smile. "Only because you never needed it. You've been building all along." Later that night, the first press release hit the wires with a quiet finality. Marla Baird officially assumes full control of D&T Holdings after acquisition by Lou Capital. The headline would make waves, but no one would see it coming. No one would remember how careful the steps had been, how the seat at the table had been earned in silence. Sammy was now an official part of the company. No fanfare, no applause. Just a seat at the table, earned. At the same time, Dylan sat at his small desk, scrolling through the latest alerts on his phone. He had expected to be back in the news, to have some say in the next chapter of D&T's journey. Instead, he was ignored. His resignation letter had been accepted. No fanfare, no goodbye. just a simple statement in an impersonal email. The notifications flooded in, but all he saw was one headline after another, detailing Sammy's rise, the acquisition's success, the leadership shakeup. The world kept turning without him. He closed his phone and leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty space before him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could even begin to rebuild. Legacy doesn't ask for acknowledgement, it writes its own headline. The morning the Business Ledger feature went live, the city was already awake with noise, cars, meetings, markets opening, but Marla's condo was still. The only sound was the soft hum of her percolator and the rhythmic scrape of her spoon against porcelain as she stirred sugar into her coffee. On the front page of the business section, Marla Griffin, the quiet founder who rewrote the rules. The article was elegant, deliberate, just like her. They'd finally gotten her maiden name right, the one she'd used when she signed the seed check that birthed D&T Holdings, the same name she'd hidden behind when her son thought he was building something new. The photographs were old, grainy shots from early financing meetings in Midtown conference rooms. In one, a much younger Marla leaned over a table of investors, her posture straight, expression unreadable. In another, she stood behind a whiteboard covered in numbers, her hand frozen mid-gesture, explaining an equation no one in the room could dispute. She read the article once, then again. Slowly, midway down the page was a single pull quote, bolded in italics beneath her portrait. "I don't correct liars, I outlast them." Marla Griffin. Marla set her cup down. The faintest smile ghosted across her lips. She hadn't spoken to the reporter. She hadn't given permission for the piece, but someone, Kara most likely, had leaked the original interview notes from years ago. And somehow, that single sentence had survived all the edits. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was record-keeping. That evening, the Midtown Conservatory glowed under soft amber lights for the Women in Leadership Gala, the annual event honoring pioneers in finance, innovation, and strategy. The place smelled faintly of peonies and champagne. The walls shimmered with the kind of quiet power that didn't need to announce itself. Sammy stood near the entrance, wearing a midnight blue dress that fit her like confidence. She held the invitation in one hand, the silver clutch in the other. Her name was printed under Marla's, Samira Holt. Representing Ms. Marla Griffin, Baird Capital. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her phone. She just scanned the room the way Marla had taught her to, see everything, react to nothing. Kara found her first. She looked radiant in black velvet, a flute of champagne already in hand. "There you are," Kara said warmly. "I almost thought you'd hide in the back like Marla." Sammy smiled faintly. She prefers quiet victories. Kara raised her glass. "And yet here we are, celebrating them." They moved toward the main hall as servers passed trays of oysters and sparkling wine. The din of conversation swelled. Soft laughter, the murmur of deals being made even in celebration. Kara took the stage just as the lights dimmed. Her speech began simple, polished, but then her tone deepened. "This year, we honor someone who taught us all that leadership doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and still gets everything it came for." The crowd leaned in. She was called a consultant, an investor, an advisor, but the truth? She was the architect. She built a legacy in silence while others made noise. And tonight, we name her what she always was. A founder. A pause. A beat of reverent quiet. Kara lifted her glass. "To the women who built quietly, and now own loudly." Applause rippled through the hall. Sammy's hands tightened slightly around her glass, pride and awe rising in her chest. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the invisible tether that connected her to Marla pull tighter. She didn't need to look toward the cameras. She didn't need to say anything. She was already part of the story. Across town, in the dim light of his apartment, Dylan scrolled through the same article for the third time. The words blurred, then sharpened again as he tried to process them. Marla Griffin, quiet founder. He read the line twice. Griffin, he whispered, almost incredulous. He'd forgotten she used that name before she married his father, before she built everything he thought he'd inherited. He scrolled down to the quote, that sharp, surgical line. "I don't correct liars, I outlast them." The glass in his hand trembled slightly. He set it down and stared at the wall, breathing shallow. Every headline, every image, every memory collapsed into one truth. He'd been chasing shadows in a house she had already built. He'd never stood a chance. The sound of the city outside faded as his phone buzzed on the counter. Another alert, another headline. Samira Holt represents Marla Griffin at Leadership Gala. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. For the first time in his life, Dylan understood what it felt like to be irrelevant. Back in the quiet of her study, Marla watched the live stream for exactly 3 minutes, just long enough to see Sammy on stage, standing tall beside Kara, just long enough to see the applause crest and fade. Then she closed the laptop. The needles in her hands clicked together once before she set them aside. George's voice drifted from the doorway, soft but edged with humor. "So that's what victory looks like?" Marla glanced up, her expression unreadable. "That's what correction looks like." Georgia stepped closer, leaning against the doorframe. "You could have been there, you know," Marla's lips twitched. "I was." Her eyes flicked to the screen, where the paused image of Sammy, confident, unshaken, reflected faintly in the glass. For the first time, she felt something like peace. But peace was never the end. Some legacies are built, others are blocked at the door. Tasha stood in the lobby of a boutique venture firm on Park Avenue, her coat sharp, pitch deck in hand, and fire in her eyes. She hadn't worn defeat well, so she'd buried it in work. A month of whiteboarding, late-night mock-ups, brand colors chosen with the kind of precision she used to reserve for headline placements. The name was clean, Sable, a wellness tech hybrid, sleek and flexible. She'd rehearsed the tagline 100 times in the mirror. Where recovery meets real time. She had every bullet point ready. TAM, CAC, exit potential. Even some recycled phrases from her days at D&T. The receptionist gave her a tight smile and motioned her toward the glass conference room. 20 minutes later, it was over. She didn't get past the third slide. The first partner hadn't made eye contact. The second tapped notes into a laptop with the passive aggression of disinterest. But it was the third, a woman named Elise, who delivered the final blow. "We've reviewed your background, Ms. Lennox. Given the recent SEC audit and unresolved investor disputes from your time at D&T, we're going to pass." Tasha blinked. "Those were executive-level matters. I wasn't." Elise raised a hand, polite but immovable. "You were on the signature line." The silence that followed was colder than the glass between them. By the time Tasha stepped outside, her inbox was already quiet. Her follow-up emails, sent before the meeting, confident in tone, sat unread. Her LinkedIn page, once humming with algorithm-boosted posts and soft-focus headshots, had gone still. The status changed subtly over the next week. Her headline, Founder at Stealth Startup. Then, in transition. Then nothing. She removed her banner photo, deleted her last round of startup inspiration quotes. Eventually, she stopped logging in altogether. Her phone buzzed occasionally, mostly old friends offering vague encouragement and equally vague distance. She knew what they were really saying. "We're watching, but we're not standing next to you." Victor sat in his office the following week. A familiar folder opened before him. He flipped to the last page, then signed in 3 quick strokes. Final termination documents, Tasha Lennox. Reason, breach of fiduciary oversight, confirmed by audit findings. He sent a carbon copy to the ethics panel. No emotion, no commentary, just a clean legal finish. Marla said nothing publicly. She hadn't needed to. The silence around Tasha's downfall spoke for itself, wrapped in the absence of support, in the spaces where her name used to be. There was no press release, no takedown. Just doors that no longer opened and conversations that now ended one word too early. She kept her statement off the record. When asked for comment, she sent nothing. And that nothing weighed more than outrage ever could. Meanwhile, Sammy stood before a small auditorium of students at Bryn Mawr University. The Griffin Tech Fellowship Program had officially launched its new cohort. 12 young women in their second year of business school, handpicked not for their polish, but for their precision. Behind her was a simple backdrop. Dark navy, gold lettering, Griffin Tech, built different, built to last. Sammy wore a blazer Marla had once gifted her. Simple and structured, with a faint stitched-in monogram on the inner seam. MG. She stepped up to the podium and exhaled. I'm not here to tell you how to win, she began, steady and clear. I'm here to show you what happens when you stop waiting to be invited. The crowd was quiet, sharp, curious eyes on every word. This fellowship isn't about becoming someone else's assistant. It's about building something they'll never forget you led. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Measured doesn't mean passive. And correction doesn't always come with noise. Kara, seated in the front row, smiled. Victor beside her nodded once. And in the back, arms crossed, Marla watched from the shadows. She didn't need to sit in the spotlight. She had already filled the room, across town in a much smaller co-working space that still smelled like drywall. Tasha stared at a half-written mission statement on her laptop. She closed it, sat in silence. A single notification blinked at the top of her screen. Victor Mendez has removed you as authorized signer on record. Status: terminated. She opened her calendar. It was empty. She opened Slack. No new messages. For the first time, Tasha realized the future wasn't paused. It had passed her. She looked down at her hands, manicured, still, powerless. Then she shut the laptop and stared into the quiet. Back at Bryn Mawr, after the ceremony ended, Sammy returned to Marla's side near the back exit. They asked if I wanted to speak at next year's summit, Sammy said. Still a little breathless. Marla tilted her head. Do you? Sammy nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I do. Marla handed her a thin leather notebook. Then start writing something worth saying. Sammy opened it. On the first page was a quote in Marla's cursive. Legacy isn't given. It's built from what you refuse to let go quiet. Sammy read it once, then looked up. Is it over? She asked. Marla's gaze was still. No, she said softly. It's just begun. Some lessons can't be inherited. They have to be built from splinters. The rain came steady over Manhattan. A quiet percussion against the wide glass of Marla's office. The city below glimmered in reflection, sleek, exhausted, relentless. She had always admired that about it. Across from her sat a young woman, maybe late 20s, nervously smoothing the crease of her blazer. She was everything Marla used to be. Sharp, prepared, terrified of wasting anyone's time. Thank you for meeting me, the woman said, voice barely above a whisper. I know you're, busy. Marla smiled faintly. I made time. That's what you're supposed to do for people who are actually building something. The woman, Clara Vance, founder of a fintech startup called BalanceWorks, nodded quickly, clutching her folder like armor. I've been told investors are hesitant, Clara admitted. They want traction, proof, some guarantee I can handle scale. They always do, Marla said. That's because they still think leadership is about confidence instead of clarity. Clara blinked, unsure if that was advice or critique. Marla stood and crossed to her desk, picking up a thin stack of papers. These are templates, term sheets, founder agreements, non-competes. I used to keep them for my own team. Now I give them to people who might actually use them wisely. Clara reached for the folder, eyes widening. You're just giving these to me? I'm lending you a language, Marla said. Learn to speak it before someone else speaks it for you. There was something about the way she said it, measured, calm, that made the room feel like a classroom and a confessional all at once. You remind me of someone, Marla added, too focused on proving she belongs to notice she already does. Your daughter? Clara asked, tentative. Marla's gaze didn't falter. No, my son. The words landed with a gravity that didn't need context. Later that afternoon, as Clara left with her folder clutched like scripture, Georgia appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that knowing expression she'd perfected over decades of friendship. You're still collecting strays, Georgia said, handing her one. Marla accepted it without argument. I like people who haven't learned to pretend they know everything yet, Georgia chuckled. You keep building bridges from burned wood. Marla turned toward the window, watching the lights flicker against the wet skyline. It still holds if you know where to reinforce. That sounds like a quote you'll regret, Georgia said. No, Marla replied, her tone quiet but firm. Regret comes from the bridges you never build at all. Georgia studied her for a moment. Does Dylan know that? Marla didn't answer. She didn't have to. By evening, the office was nearly empty. Marla sat at her desk, rereading Clara's proposal. The ideas were rough, too optimistic, too eager. But there was honesty there, the kind Dylan's generation had replaced with charm. Her phone buzzed. A text from Irene Hale, a venture partner from one of her older circles. Marla, sending you a founder who reminds me of myself. Try not to crush her too fast. Irene, no promises, but if she listens, I'll make her dangerous. Marla smiled faintly and set the phone down. She thought briefly of her son again, how he used to burst into her office as a boy, full of impossible ideas. Back then, she'd told him to be careful, to think, to plan. She'd taught him structure before curiosity, order before instinct. She realized too late that she'd raised him to protect what he built, not to earn it. At the Griffin Tech offices the next morning, Sammy called an impromptu meeting. The new fellowship cycle had just begun, and she was still shaping its purpose. I want to expand, she said, standing at the head of the small conference table. Not just scholarships, grants. Microfunding for founders who don't have the right last name or the right introductions. Kara looked intrigued. You want to bankroll first-timers. I want to find the ones no one's watching yet, Sammy said. The ones who haven't learned to ask permission. Victor raised an eyebrow. That's a risky pitch. Marla, seated quietly near the end, finally spoke. Every good one is. Sammy met her eyes, understanding passing between them like current. They didn't name it then, but later that afternoon the press release went live. The Quiet Builders Fund, a new initiative providing capital and mentorship for women founders under 30. The tagline read simply, built for those who build anyway. That night, Marla stood in her kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. George's words echoed faintly in her mind. Burned wood. Maybe that was what she had become. A builder of things meant to outlast fire. Her phone vibrated once more. A message from Clara. Clara, they said yes. Thank you for trusting me. Marla smiled, setting the glass down. Her reflection in the window was softened by city lights. Older, yes, but steady. Marla, just build something worth inheriting. She watched the message send, then lingered for a long moment in the quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the silence finally felt earned. Some messages arrived late. This one landed exactly when it stopped mattering. It came on a Thursday, late afternoon. Light low across Marla's office, streaking through half-closed blinds, catching the rim of her untouched teacup. The city buzzed beneath her window, but her world was unusually still. Her phone lit up once. Dylan Baird, I just realized what you built. All of it. I didn't understand. Not until now. No apology. No question. Just that. She didn't reply. She didn't even tap the screen to dismiss it. She let it fade into the dimness on its own, like a ghost knocking once before retreating into the past. Across the room, Georgia sat on the arm of the couch, swirling the last of her club soda, watching the silence stretch. That text read like he just discovered gravity, she said, dry and amused. Next he'll tell you water's wet. Marla exhaled, not a sigh, just a slow release. He wanted legacy before he'd earned clarity. Same mistake most men make. You're not going to respond, Georgia asked, already knowing the answer. Marla didn't look up. If he's just realizing it now, he's not ready for the answer. Later that night, Marla sat in the quiet of her study with a pen in hand and a folder open beside her. The trust documents had already been updated, signed, notarized, finalized. But one page remained, the addendum. She slid the paper in front of her and in neat ink wrote a single line. To Dylan, you were raised better. Then she signed it, sealed it, and placed it in the envelope designated for him. She turned to the next folder, marked Tech and IP Assets, Future Custodian. Samira Holt's name was already typed at the top. She would inherit everything: licensing rights, cloud infrastructure, platform IP, patents still pending. The framework Marla had spent decades building, piece by strategic piece. It didn't feel sentimental, it felt precise. Like the moment a bridge locks into place across a chasm. The following week, Sammy sat in the Griffin Tech war room, fielding questions from the advisory team. Her posture was steady, voice sure. Yes, she said, tapping her screen to highlight a bullet point. We're approving the Round 1 grant recipients this quarter. Expansion comes next. Victor leaned back, half smiling. You're ahead of schedule. Sammy didn't flinch. So was she. Kara, seated beside him, raised her glass bottle of water slightly in salute. Marla sat in the corner, quiet, watching, listening. Her role wasn't to steer anymore. It was to see what happened when you'd handed the wheel to someone who knew how to drive the thing forward. The company was thriving, not because it had survived the scandal or even the acquisition, but because the noise was gone. The friction had been replaced with function. What remained was discipline, not drama. Across town, Dylan sat on a park bench under a sky that was too blue for the heaviness in his chest. The text he'd sent had been seen, delivered, but not read. He stared at the screen again, still no reply. There had been a moment earlier that morning when he thought she might finally acknowledge him, even just one word, but the silence, like everything else she'd done lately, was surgical. He'd always thought of Marla as someone quietly proud of him, a strategist in the background, rooting for her only son. But now he understood the truth. She hadn't been in the background. She had been building the structure. And when he'd tried to replace her, she hadn't pushed back. She had just waited, and then reclaimed it all. He checked his email again. One message had arrived this morning, auto-forwarded from legal counsel. Trust updates. The file was clean. Numbers, percentages, designations. At the end, the note. You were raised better. That was it. No threats, no lecture, no justification, just truth. He closed the email and sat with it. Let it sting. Back in Marla's home, the light shifted as the sun dipped behind the skyline. She folded the last of her legal files and stood, stretching slowly. In the hallway, Georgia emerged with 2 wine glasses and a single question in her eyes. Is it done? Marla took the glass. Thought for a moment, then, no, but it's finally mine again. They clinked their glasses, just once. And in the other room, her phone vibrated again. She didn't check it. She already knew what it would say. Legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hand-stitched. It was a Saturday morning in late spring when Marla stepped into the garden behind her brownstone. The air smelled faintly of lavender and wet stone. Tulips leaned toward the sun in obedient rows, and the faint sound of wind chimes echoed from the neighbor's yard like glass whispers. She hummed softly as she walked, an old song from nowhere in particular, her hands tucked into her cardigan pockets, her pace unhurried. She no longer moved like someone trying to keep up with the world, because now the world had to catch up with her. At the edge of the garden, beneath the pergola, a work table waited. On it sat a soft blue-gray scarf, hand-woven and nearly complete. The yarn was fine, the kind that snagged easily if rushed. She picked up her needles, adjusted the final row, and pulled the last stitch with practiced grace. It wasn't perfect, but it was intentional. She folded the scarf neatly into a thin white box, pressed a single lavender sprig beneath the ribbon, and slid a small note beneath the fold of the yarn. In her handwriting, not all work is loud, some is stitched. MG Sammy found the package the next morning on her office desk. No courier note, no signature on the delivery sheet, just her name, handwritten in familiar, angular script. She opened it slowly, carefully. The scent hit her first, lavender and wool. Then the scarf itself, soft, intricate, resilient. She held it for a moment, fingers pressing gently into the weave. Then she saw the note. She read it twice, then placed both scarf and card inside the glass display shelf beside her desk, beneath the framed launch plaque for the Quiet Builders Fund, beside her own business cards. A new line had been etched into the plaque's base the week before. Marla Griffin, founding investor. Later that day, Sammy stood in the new boardroom, same building, new energy. The long table gleamed under fresh lights, surrounded by younger faces, sharper minds. Investors she hadn't needed to chase now listened when she spoke. Kara stood at the far end, arms folded, watching Sammy direct the next funding cycle. When the meeting ended, she walked over, smiling. "This is your company now," Kara said. Sammy looked around the room, at the framed reports, the humming screens, the old walls bearing new names. She smiled back. It always was. They just didn't see it. That night, Marla stood in her study. watching the scarf on Sammy's shelf via a snapshot Georgia had texted her. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she returned to the armchair near the window and resumed her newest project. No scarf this time, something more ambitious. A quilt, blue and charcoal, each square marked by dates no one else would recognize. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of thread through fabric. Georgia entered without knocking, holding 2 mugs. "No headlines today?" she asked, handing one over. Marla shook her head. "No need. I already said everything I needed to say." Georgia leaned against the wall, taking a sip. "You know," she said, "for someone who doesn't talk much, you sure left a loud footprint." Marla smiled faintly. "I was always pulling the thread." Weeks later, an editorial ran in the Wall Street Journal under a small headline: "The Founders You Forgot to Credit." Below it, in elegant black and white, was a photo of Marla Griffin, mid-sentence, one hand raised near her face in that signature way she had when disproving someone politely. The piece didn't go viral, but it found the right inboxes. And in those circles, it spread like gospel. At the end of the article, one quote stood alone. "At my birthday, they joked that I should start knitting instead of giving opinions. A week later, I knitted together the deal that ended their company." Marla Griffin. Some read it and winced. Others read it and took notes. Sammy read it and closed her laptop slowly, the faintest smile curling at the corner of her mouth. And across the city, in a quiet brownstone garden, Marla sat under the pergola, staring at the blue sky and not thinking of the past. She was already threading the future.